Today we're going to talk about irrigation part one, and there will be a second part of irrigation next week, and that will focus mostly on the LADWP rebates and whatnot. And then, as Tim mentioned, then you'll have a follow-up with the optional in-person workshop, which will review a lot of that stuff that we're going over today. And I totally recommend it if you can do it. So yeah, today is mostly kind of just talking about the garden, like defining a garden and its irrigation needs, and then kind of talking about how we schedule irrigation to mimic seasons. And to start, we've got like we're just going to be talking about a lot of factors that influence your irrigation needs, right? And so plants have evolved to survive on a bunch of like on varying amounts of water depending on biotic and abiotic features in the landscape. So biotic being like living things in the landscape and non-living things in the landscape, and these affect how much irrigation they need. And they basically, it's just about native plants. It's all about the appropriate amount of water in the soil applied at the right time and at the right frequency. And it's just all about getting the irrigation right. So this is kind of like the key key to having success. They really do best when you figure out your irrigation situation. To put this over here. So to start, like one of the main factors is talking about what community of plants does the native plant that you're watering come from? And obviously California as a state has a bunch of different bioregions, but most of our California natives in the cultivated landscapes, so stuff that you're seeing in people's gardens, are primarily coming from chaparral regions, coastal sage scrub, oak woodlands, and desert plants. So they tend to be all pretty drought tolerant, which means they have like low or very low water needs. And they've all evolved, well, at least ones in these bioregions have evolved to deal with pretty high heat and also low moisture, hence why they're drought tolerant. So, and they do that either through their kind of leaf adaptations, or usually most of them, or not most of them, but many of them with summer dormancy, when that's kind of that crispy look that happens in summer when they look dead, but they're really just kind of conserving their moisture. And let's see. Oh, right. So yeah, they've evolved to have this thing to have low water needs. But in our gardens, they might look a little bit better with water, right? So in the landscape is different than, or like in the natural landscape versus in our gardens, especially with clients that might not want that crispy look in summertime, they can do a little bit better with water. But knowing when your plants go dormant, if you have a dormant kind of plant, or knowing about your plants is really key to the maintenance part. So it's really all about like knowing where your plant is and its origin is from, so that you can best kind of figure out its irrigation situation. So knowing, I think actually, yeah. Knowing where your plants come from, again, that's like going back to those resources we talked about last week, looking at Calscape, Theodore Payne, obviously, Las Politas. Those are all your friends, and they can help you determine where those plants' origins are, so that you can better figure out their irrigation. California also has riparian plants, so ones that are, adapted to grow near riversides and streamsides, and everything from like redwoods also. And so not redwoods, but redwood plant, like forest plant communities. And obviously those that come from kind of river or heavier water areas are going to require much more water in terms of irrigation, especially if you're planting them in a Southern California garden. So it's, again, just knowing the plant that you're dealing with. And most gardens are going to have a mix of plants from different, either mostly from, like we said, the chaparral and coastal sage scrub and stuff like that. But if you have a mix of several types of plants, you just want to know what you have in your kind of plant palette, right? And the best way to assess their irrigation, again, is to know about the plant and not assume that it's drought tolerant. Assuming that they're drought tolerant is kind of like, it sets you up potentially for underwatering maybe a riparian plant or something like that. And yeah, I think mostly it's about not all natives have the same watering needs, and there really isn't like a one size fits all formula for watering. So most of this class is going to be giving you these like these kind of general tips, but the idea is that it's a really complicated, um, interconnected factors that create your watering, your irrigation. I'm forgetting the word for this, with like your irrigation situation setup. But anyway, it's just not a one size fits all thing is the main takeaway.
Yeah, and just to add on that, and it's just something that I was discussing today with our other instructor, Emerson, who's teaching the Spanish language, and we're having our in-person workshops this Saturday, is, a lot of times, and this is just a preface for the irrigation class. And again, I think people just reading the curriculum can understand how important irrigation is. I mean, we've dedicated 2 of the 9 classes to irrigation because it really is the most critical factor in establishing and successfully establishing California native plants, even those that are drought tolerant. But, just looking at our garden in Theodore Payne, I was looking at a Rus lentii, which is a species of sumac that comes from Baja California, and 2 feet away from it in the same exact irrigation zone, so it's watered with the same system, is Arctostaphylos heucheri, which is a species of manzanita that grows, it's endemic to California, only grows in Santa Cruz and San Francisco. So if you compare those 2 biogeographical locations, extremely different. While many of the coastal regions of California and Baja they do have that summer fog, the precipitation levels between those 2 different places is extremely different. And what I think Claire is alluding to in that, as avid gardeners, people are interested in having a diverse flora in their garden. And unless you're really planting community-based plantings, which is pretty uncommon to only plant stuff that naturally occurs together, what we're talking about is that you're going to have to compromise and kind of find that sweet spot that whatever irrigation schedule that you do decide to kind of meets the needs of all the plants at the lower end. So so even though my Rus lentii could probably go 0 summer water throughout the entire summer in Sun Valley, where we have temperatures ranging up to 120 degrees, that Arctostaphylos heucheri is not really going to tolerate a 0 summer water situation even after establishment. It's just way too arid and hot and dry in Southern California for that plant to tolerate 100% dry down. So again, just thinking about the compromise between these different plants and kind of trying to find that medium in between all those different needs to ensure that you're getting success with all different plants within a single zone.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think you guys will notice throughout this lesson and the next one, and especially the workshop too, that there will just be a lot of kind of things that will be like, hey, well, that doesn't fit with this. There's no perfect kind of answer to your irrigation woes, so it's just trying to find the best fit, like you said, the sweet spot. So a factor that influences the irrigation needs is obviously just the rate of water loss. And these are kind of obvious, but also just important to remember, which is like your rate of water loss. So the amount of water lost is going to increase with more heat or more wind. And that's either can be like reflected heat, off of structures, or just direct sun. That's going to increase the amount of water you lose. And it's going to decrease when you have more humidity. So like the rains that we've been having, or you guys might be having, or whenever they're coming, that's going to decrease your rate of water loss when you have a lot of humidity in the air. And the rate of water loss is not the same for each plant. And it's important to realize that like water uptake, so the plant's ability to like kind of pull water up through its roots, it doesn't always keep pace with its transpiration. So transpiration is like the plant's water loss through its leaves. So like kind of its breathing. So yeah, so the water uptake, its ability to take up water through the roots isn't necessarily the same rate as that of which it's losing it. So sometimes you might see that in like on a really hot day, you might see like wilting on the tips of your of whatever plant. And then all of a sudden when it's cooled off and the sun's gone down, the turgidity of the plant kind of goes back. So the wilting is all of a sudden disappeared. And that's kind of a case of when the rates don't match up. So, and that's not necessarily that the plant needs more water. It's just that it's just kind of an adaptation to a hot situation. You might like potentially put like temporary shade on it if it was something like that. But essentially that's kind of a natural occurrence too. Some other things that affect the rate of water loss would be just young plants. They're kind of more, they're more susceptible to um, losing water, but that's also just really, that's directly related to the fact that they have these kind of small containers that, or sorry, small root balls because they're kind of constrained to the container size that they're in, right? And that's the same for also their potting soil, which tends to be looser, right? And that will dry out more quickly. So it's the water loss in a potted plant is going to be higher than the rate of one that is planted in the ground. And then this is the last point there is landscape plants in heat islands, which is similar to the point I was making earlier about the kind of reflected heat. If it's in a heat island like yeah, surrounded by a lot of concrete or whatnot, they can require a lot more water than that same species, same size, same age in like a park setting with a lot of vegetation around. So it's, again, this is that kind of, that's that reflected heat thing that kind of happens. So I mentioned earlier, but like there's abiotic factors and these biotic factors. And the abiotic ones would be these kind of non-living factors that would change your irrigation needs. One of those would be like your soil type. So just like we did yesterday, last week, the soil texture that you have and understanding how that soil type that you have affects the infiltration and how long that soil holds on to water. So obviously that would influence how much you irrigate. On a sandier soil, that's going to drain more quickly and not hold on to water. So you're potentially watering more often than with a soil type that's clay. So that's an abiotic factor. Because obviously soil as itself is potentially kind of like a living thing because it has soil organisms in it, but just the soil type, like the actual texture and stuff. Light and shade, that's an obvious one. If you have a tree canopy and a lot of shade that it's throwing, that's less water. You potentially losing less water. And that goes for also whatever structures you might have that cast shade or shadows onto your soil or onto your plants. I wonder if you guys can see Tim and his, anyway. Okay, third abiotic a factor would be like topography or aspect. And so topography, just like a canyons or slopes. So slopes tend to drain more quickly because obviously just gravity itself, they're draining more quickly. And then a canyon is just like the topography of that is that, essentially that's where water goes to, and that is where you would find more water. And so losing less water, it's less exposed, right? And then the aspects, so like a north facing slope are generally shadier. And like a south facing slope is something that might be getting, blasted by the sun all summer long. So obviously it's going to change the way you irrigate. And hydrology, which is essentially kind of like the movement of water kind of through your landscape. It's almost just like thinking about the watershed, and you can think of this on a large scale, like your actual watershed. And if you have rainfall, where does that water flow throughout your landscape on a big scale, but also you can think on the small scale. If you think of your like little postage stamp sized garden as its own little watershed, knowing where the water would naturally move on that, landscape. And yeah, so just knowing those are the abiotic factors. Biotic ones would be things that relate to the life around, right? So living factors and the life around your plants and stuff. And the way they would something that would influence irrigation needs would be like competition from other plants. And that's because or organisms, any microorganisms that compete for light and water and nutrients. Those are competing, and that's a living competition happening. And that is cultivated plants and natural communities both do this. They're both competing for those. But cultivated plants tend to grow faster and larger than plants in a natural community. So that's just going to look different and look different over time, the way they compete for light and resources and whatnot. And also there's horticultural varieties that tend to, they've been cultivated or selected for accepting a little bit wider of a variance in moisture, so being a little more garden tolerant. Something like Penstemon Margarita Bop is just, it's selected for a little more acceptance of a range of acceptance of moisture, right? And let's see, okay, so like this aesthetic focus. So there's also this difference between when irrigating, like keeping the plant alive versus, so the ones that survive in nature versus what looks good in a garden. And so there's that difference too in terms of irrigation. If you're just irrigating to keep things alive, that's a really different goal than irrigating to keep things looking kind of green or green all year, or somewhat more fresh looking, with fresh looking in terms of like the garden and its aesthetics. Yeah, so gardens also, like when they're younger and they're establishing, they will be a little bit more inefficient on water use. And especially that establishment period, they might be actually using as much water or, more water than once they're established. As like a turf garden, they might be using as much water. So don't be surprised in that establishment period if you're not seeing, or if the clients aren't seeing kind of savings yet. It's really after they're established that they start to become able to withstand longer stretches without water. Let's see. Oh, well, and then, yeah, I guess water, I mean, in general, just water water is essentially water gives life to other things. So, when you water your garden, you're also watering any weeds or pests that potentially live there too. So just learning how to properly manage them so you don't have issues with weeds and pests is an important thing. But knowing that once you're starting to apply water to that garden, you are basically watering everyone. And then mulch, which, I mean, is not like a living thing, but it is an organic. It was formerly alive, so I kind of think of it as like an organic factor. It helps keep water in the soil, like once it's there. So when you're applying irrigation potentially with mulch, you might have to apply more because you have to kind of, the water has to filtrate past this layer of wood chips or the bark or whatever mulch you have there, especially with those organic mulches. So potentially you're adding more irrigation with a mulched garden. Some other factors. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, and then I was going to say that's just another reason why you want to keep your mulch to 3 to 4 inches, because if you're putting 6, sometimes you see just way over mulched gardens and you got to put down a ½ inch of water before you even get to the soil. So that's another reason why you don't want to over apply mulch.
Good point.
Yeah, so a little.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. I forgot about that, but people too get really excited about mulch and like just go crazy and have like this big ass like sofa on top, and there can be too much, because it is a balance of actually getting water to the soil. So another factor is just kind of the age of the plants or the age of the garden. And it would seem like the younger a plant, that it would need less water than a more mature plant. But it's not necessarily the case, because most natives, when they're in that establishment period, so like the first 2 years when they're new, to their new location, they're going to require moderate to regular irrigation or watering. Whereas once they've been established, they tend to be able to, they're going to want like infrequent watering. So it's not necessarily the case that like a younger plant will need less water. let's see here. Yeah, and there is this range of needs between plants um, that plants that actually want to be, again, this kind of like where do they come from? So plants that want to be in perpetually wet soil versus ones that really kind of can't hang with too much summer irrigation or are very picky about it. So something like a great chain fern or something like that, that's totally comfortable being in quite a bit of uh, perpetually wet soil is a totally different case than like a woolly blue corals or like Fremontodendron who like do not, I mean, unless do not do well with excessive summer moisture or irrigation. So kind of knowing too, there's the range. Again, there's this balance. There's no kind of hard and fast rule. I
Yeah, and just
believe,
another point, sorry,
go ahead.
just while we're talking about this kind of like age of plants, and as a grower, I like to think about it as this continual weaning and transition from, where do these plants come from? They come from seeds or cuttings or divisions. And when we're first starting out plants in the nursery, we might be irrigating them occasionally every day to every other day to get them germinated, to get them rooted. And then once they're rooted and germinated, we're hitting them with irrigation 3 times a week, potentially twice a week. And as soon as they're in the ground, that insulation of the soil and the mulch automatically decreases that frequency to once a week or so. And that's when you're establishing your garden and kind of thinking about weaning these plants off of those nursery settings and continually to wean and pull back the irrigation schedule to be more infrequent as the plant ages and roots out. And the other thing, it kind of ties into that inefficiency matter. If you're using your system, an irrigation system, as opposed to hand watering, a lot of times you're going to be watering already saturated soil just with the objective of rehydrating the pot or the potting mix or that individual plant, which is not yet rooted out into the soil. So we're going to get into more of that nuanced kind of irrigation during establishment in the in-person class. But again, thinking about that kind of transition from that nursery setting into the landscape is really important when we're thinking about our irrigation regime.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely thinking about your plant. Yeah, it's a good point for the age, thinking about, and if starting off versus once they get older. Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we in a little bit too. But essentially, yeah, I think here this slide, what is it trying to tell me? Oh, yeah. So early again, like when they're younger, like potentially you're watering more frequently younger plants, and you're probably seeing growth being put on usually, especially in that establishment period. And so that irrigation you're seeing is leading to larger sizes, but there's really no benefit to overwatering older plants, and they tend to be more sensitive to, root rots and stuff like that. So again, just this age thing of the transition and kind of slowly transitioning plants out of too much watering is kind of like the goal here. Okay, so irrigating to mimic the seasons. So yeah, again, we talked about this, I think last week, but, or did we? Anyway, we have this Mediterranean climate with these dry, warm summers and then our wet, kind of cooler winters. And you can think of the dry, warm summers as being a period when there's more transpiration happening right from the plant, so more water loss, and then the opposite during the winter. And they've evolved with this, that these native plants have evolved with this climate. And again, irrigation is just the most important factor for these newly planted transplants. And during the first 2 years of their life, that is the establishment period. And what we're aiming for with this, for getting them established, is that for them to have extensive root systems and for basically over time to be able to take long stretches without being watered. That is what establishment means. So like once they're established, it means they have really extensive root systems, and they can go periods of time with less or no water, right? That usually is like 1 to 2 years. And that's what we're going for here. We're like trying to, um, these newly planted things, we're really trying to get them in the ground and get them established so that they can become mature, and our watering situation can become, more regular essentially. Let's see here. Yeah, and again, like again, so the establishment is that they can deal with less water, or they can survive with less water. But again, survival is different than aesthetics, and that's a different irrigation situation. But either way, it's all kind of going in this transitional period of the transition from from more frequent watering to less watering.
And one thing I'll just add to this part of the conversation too, and there's some major points of our philosophy on irrigation is that, and we're going to get into this kind of replicating wet winters and watering to get established, and that is, um, if if your goal is to never apply water in the summer, it's totally doable. But the plant selection is the critical part of making that a successful objective. And if that is your objective, you should be planting plants that are local to your area or areas that have less natural rainfall than where you are. So the deserts. And in Southern California, we do have a lot of extremely arid areas. But that is like a really major focus for me in trying to kind of help people understand how to water in the summer, because I think that's really where people struggle is, how do I water in the summer? Do I water? Do I not water? But if your overall goal for your client's goal really is water conservation at the core, then you can succeed with zero summer water, or just applying irrigation just to wash off dust, which is a huge issue with urban gardens, is that a lot of dust accumulates on foliage and you just want to wash it off, which we'll discuss a little bit later. But you need to be focusing on the local flora and flora from areas with less precipitation. Um, and that's, again, you only apply that zero summer irrigation strategy after your plants are established. And you only get the plants established through deep and frequent irrigation cycles that encourage the roots to chase water down and not laterally, which is one of the really big issues with a lot of drought tolerant irrigation suggestions, is these little bursts of irrigation through drip line 3 times a week for 5 minutes, which all that encourages is surface rooting, and not really those well-established root systems which can help a plant withstand that long stretch of no irrigation, particularly again in the summer.
Right. Yeah. Um, yeah, definitely that is an important point in terms of, yeah, it's about kind of your goals. Is it to have like an aesthetically green looking garden all year, or is it to conserve water? And that is an important aspect of, figuring out what your client really wants from their garden. And that's pretty standard in terms of working with a garden and maintaining it, right? With a client involved.
And that's also a part of, maybe there's the potential limitations of California native plants in terms of like what your aesthetic is and where you want to go. And there's plenty of California native plants that can take zero summer water and still look fabulous all summer. Rhuses, I talk about rhuses every time I participate in one of the classes, and as well as other shrubs, frangula, coffee berries. But there are plenty of Southern California native plants that can take zero summer water, but it's not the biggest group of plants out there possible. So, and I highly doubt that most of your clients have 100% native only garden. So that's, I think, where kind of integrating other non-natives, particularly if your goal is zero summer water, so plants from hotter, drier areas, to kind of offset some of the California summer dormancy plants, is really a useful tool for designers and landscapers.
Yeah. Um, oh, yeah, for sure. Let's see. Yeah. So natives, when they want water and why, So we've mentioned this, but essentially they're adapted to our climate. And so this is kind of their natural cycle, is to receive a bunch of rain, in our rainy season, winter months. And then their active growth is, primarily fall, winter, spring, and extending into early summer with the rainfall and whatever residual moisture is left from the rain. So they prefer rain, and rain is kind of the best, highest quality water. It actually contains nitrogen in it. And so that's why plants look so like bright and vibrant after it rains. So the plants actually really want that rain, and it's the highest quality one. And really, we want to take advantage of as much of that natural watering that we can get. And when you think about it in terms of, our whatever irrigation you're providing is coming from our drinking water, and that is a precious resource. So limiting whatever you put on your kind of landscape to a minimum if you can. And again, that kind of comes down to what your client wants and what you're providing, or like what your plant palette is too. So let's see. Yeah. So the idea is kind of trying to capture water in the soil with the plants. So the plants kind of act as the sponge, and trying to capture that rainwater in the soil is what we really are trying to do here with them. And in the dry season, you want to be sure that you're providing the water. If you're watering in the summertime, you want to be sure you're providing it before the plant needs it. So if you have like a heat wave, you don't necessarily want to water that day when it's really hot. You want to kind of provide that water to the plant beforehand, before it needs it. So you can kind of think of it like a savings account or something, as you're putting that, water away for whenever the plant needs it, and it can take it out when it needs it. So that's something you would do in advance. Like you would make sure to put water down several days before you have like a Santa Ana wind event or a heat wave or something like that. But then on the other side of the coin, you definitely want to be careful with summer watering, as we've talked about, which is where the goal is to promote deep, extensive rooting. And to achieve that, you want to be doing these kind of deep, infrequent soaks. And when you do these shallow waterings, like Tim mentioned, the roots are going to go where you're watering. So if you do these little shallow waterings in the top 6 inches, the roots are just going to go right there. And obviously that top 6 inches is going to be more likely to heat up and dry out. And so you're just creating a situation where the roots are not encouraged to go down and deeper and more extensive. So the idea is, and also down deeper, it's cooler, the water is maintained better there, and it's all kind of makes sense, but it's just needs to be said, right? So yeah, it's just kind of this Goldilocks situation of like, you want to do some water in the summer, but not too much, and making sure that you're not encouraging the roots to stay in a shallow space, and also not, and obviously not waterlogging, not doing too much water in the summer, because if you overwater, then you're creating this like warm, swampy situation, which lends itself to root rots and things like that. And here, I think here it has like a general rule, which is helpful, is it's time to irrigate, and do irrigate, meaning like do one of your big deep soaks when the soil is dry at a depth of 3 to 4 inches. So if you dig down and it's 3 to 4 inches and it's dry, that's kind of a general rule for like, yeah, you can irrigate. But if you're touching the soil at the top and it's wet, it probably doesn't need to be watered. I mean, again, there's all the exceptions in the world, but that's the general tone there. And it just to know that it's just like a delicate balance, right? Let's see, next one. And actually, that reminds me, you guys have this week in your handouts, I believe in your student workbook, the handout for this week is a summer planting guide. That one's super helpful. It's basically all of this in a nutshell for summer planting, and really gives reminders, all the tips that you would need. It's really helpful for if you want to plant in the summertime. And even if you don't, it's just highlighting the same points that we're making about irrigation. So I highly recommend looking that one over. And also even going back and looking over the just generic planting guide from day one. That one also has a lot of your tips that that are going to be really helpful. Let's see. Yeah, hand watering sometimes is just the most efficient way because in the first, at least the most efficient way for a new landscape that you've planted, because really it allows for that flexibility of being able to do the deep soaks and then additionally kind of watering if something needs it, if one plant is drier than another. And just that sometimes hand watering just is just more helpful in the beginning because it just allows for the flexibility.
And I just want to chime in here with some comments on hand watering, which is one of the methods that is less regulated by LADWP. You still have to follow their days and times when you can water, but there is no time limit to how much you hand water under the LADWP regulation. So that's just a good thing to know. And in addition, I know Claire mentioned that summer watering guide, but the very last page of everyone's handouts, there is
Oh, yeah.
this document, which is the first year establishment watering schedule by planting season. So this is again, everyone wants the perfect formula for success, but this is again just a general guide because every garden is different and every gardener is different. And so it's basically like you planted in fall, you water once a week. In the winter, you're going to pull back a little bit if it's raining. In the spring, you're going to maintain that. In the summer, you're going to continue with that every 2 weeks for establishment. And then it goes through every season up until the summer planting, which if you're planting in the summer, plants, don't be planting manzanitas or trichostomas or Vermontodendron or ceanothus in the summer, but salvias, abutilon, grasses, there's several that you can pull it off, but you're going to have to water like every 4 or 5 days to maintain that moisture, that humidity in the soil. Because really our objective again is to keep soils pretty damp in the first year to get them established and to prevent desiccation and loss of plant through just drying out completely, which is very easy to have happen. If you planted a 4-inch plant, watered it once, and then walked away in the summer, it's going to be dead within a week. That's just a matter of fact planting in Southern California when our temperatures are regularly going to surpass 100 degrees several times throughout the summer. So this is a really good document. It's the last page in the second tab of your workbook. So this is a really good kind of general guide to the points that we're trying to illustrate today.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. I love that little guide, and I wanted to mention it, so I totally forgot and blanked on it. But that is a really great kind of cheat sheet, and based off of when you planted, how you should do your kind of establishment year, how you should manage it. I think we talked about all this. Yeah, so newly planted gardens. Yeah, they might need to be a little bit more consistently moist when they're younger. And again, you don't want to water too close to the crown of the plant. And the crown is the point where like the roots meet the stem, essentially right where the plant is coming out of the soil. You want to be sure not to be overwatering that and creating waterlogged conditions. Applying water and how to apply water to natives. Basically, we're going to get into irrigation systems, but this is a little bit of the kind of principles you should follow. And essentially, no matter what irrigation system you have, you really just want to try to follow these as best as possible. It's not, like we've mentioned already, you're not going to get it down perfect, but just trying to keep all these things in mind when you're watering. Vigilant, constant monitoring of soil moisture, either through a soil probe or by hand. And you want to do that again, we said 3 to 4 inches, but as plants get older, you can go deeper, right? So 3 to 18 inches down, you want to be monitoring. And that's because most plants, like feeder roots, are in that upper 2 inches, the upper 2 feet of soil. So that's where the most activity in terms of root activity is happening at that depth. So that's where we want to be trying to water. And that's where we're going to be monitoring our soil moisture down to that whole depth, right? And yeah, so initially, early on, you want to be checking 3 to 4 inches, and as they age, you can go deeper. And that also depends on the plant, right? Different plants, like different perennials, are shorter root have shorter root systems than, like an oak tree. So again, no kind of solid fast rule, but kind of a generality. And yeah, and the idea here is you want to be monitoring this constantly, or learning it at least, so that you can start to kind of get the rhythm of like your soil's dry down rate. And that is so that you can kind of start to have like more of an intuitive ability to understand when to water, because there is no hard and fast rule. So really starting to learn and doing it by hand, super recommended. Also, obviously, LADWP has a rebate with soil probes. And there's a lot of rebate stuff in here, guys, and there will be an LADWP representative next week at our irrigation class. So if you have really specific questions, either I recommend checking out your workbook. You have quite a few of the rebates, in paper form, essentially explained in your in your workbook. And then also next week, if you've got some dying questions, we can just bombard her with questions. Or so constant monitoring of soil moisture, and you really want to get down to that 2 feet of depth when you're watering. Another important aspect when you're watering is kind of distribution uniformity. And this is you watering and applying an even amount of water over the entire surface area of the garden. And this is a lot like, because this is essentially the same thing as we're mimicking the rain. When it rains down evenly. It doesn't just like rain down on one plant. So it's important to try to mimic that as best we can. And if you're, depending on your irrigation system, if you're working with like sprinklers, you're going to want to make sure that you kind of have that head-to-head coverage, and their sprinklers are overlapping in terms of their coverage, so that you're getting that even uniformity. And then with a drip, and I'm going to talk about drip more specifically in when we get to the irrigation systems, but you want to make sure that the emitters, you're moving with the age of the plant, and not putting them too close to the stem, and making sure that you are applying, even with the emitters, trying to apply this uniformity to the root zone, right? And the root zone is not only that kind of 2 feet of depth, but you can think of it as like what's the word? Like the kind of diameter or the coverage of whatever the plant is. You might have heard the term drip line, and drip line is like the plant's essentially the same thing, which is like the canopy of the plant where it reaches. So if you're like to throw a sheet over a plant, like where does the sheet touch the ground, right? So that's the drip line. And that where it touches the ground, or where it meets the ground, that furthest out extensive diameter of the plant or its canopy, is the root zone where you want to be watering. So that's why you don't want to just like point the hose straight at the stem and water there. Not only does it potentially create root rot conditions, but the roots are kind of expanded and more active in that area around the drip line. So making sure you're mimicking that concept when you're watering.
One point, I don't know if we're going to get into this. Maybe we've talked a lot about replicating wet winters. And what is a wet winter in Southern California? That's 15 to 20 inches of precipitation between November and April. So about 15 to 20 inches over the course of 5 to 6 months, which if you break it down inches per month, it's around 3 inches per month in the wet season. So that is really your minimum threshold every year, every winter, about how much water you want to be applied in the garden. So you take that 15 to 20 inches, basically 3 inches a month, November to April, and you just subtract the precipitation, and that's kind of how much water you should be putting down.
Yeah, good point. We will go into it a bit, but definitely knowing that we're kind of aiming for a wet winter. So thinking of like that 2018, 2019 rainy season, that's like what we're going for. Not like, not these years where we kind of get, like even this year, it's like been pretty dry. We're just getting our first rain. So going for the wetter winters is like the thing we're going for with the kind of native landscapes in the garden. You'll want to, we want to water deeply and as infrequently as possible without causing plant stress. So that's the key, just as deeply and infrequently. And you're talking This is a really opposite way of kind of our traditional like turf or lawn gardens. And, those tend to be kind of like these short applications of water, several times a week throughout the year, and so this is a different, you're thinking more like watering events are not like how many times a week, but thinking of them as weeks apart between waterings, right? And in an established garden, of course. And yeah, this is let's see. Yeah, I think that's that's it for this slide. Anyway,
And I also just want to chime in, if you could go back to that slide.
yes.
It's really, for me, I always like to think of precipitation rates, inches per hour, because time, it doesn't mean anything unless you know what the delivery system you're using. So this language is derived from something that I wrote in our teacher's notes. And when I was writing 2 hours, in my head, I was thinking MP rotators, because that's one of the go-to sprinklers. And MP rotators have a precipitation rate of 0.44 inches per hour. If you were using another kind of standard nozzle, 2 hours would be way too much time, because some standard sprinklers have a precipitation rate of 4 inches per hour. You don't need to put 8 inches. No one should ever be putting 8 inches of precipitation rate down on their garden. That is just overly aggressive. The maximum amount of water you ever want to put down for any reason really is about 2 inches. That's going to saturate your soil down to 2 feet potentially. And that's really only an irrigation event that you would use to, saturate the garden completely. So that, I'll just put that out there.
Yeah, definitely good point. The times here are so dependent on what your irrigation system is, and we will get to that today. Irrigation, so like exactly how much and how long, or sorry, exactly how long you are irrigating for, so the duration and how frequent really kind of depends on, reducing the plant shock. So watering, sorry, where am I in this? I'm sorry, guys. Yeah, right. Yeah. So you want to reduce the plant shock as much as possible. So, and you want to be watering at least 2 feet down, but allowing for these good dry downs between watering cycles. And like Tim said, here's this sentence that he had mentioned earlier, which is you're replicating these kind of wet Mediterranean years. And so that's going to be what determines like your duration and frequency. And the first time you water, you should really, like the first time you're planting something, it's just been transplanted, you want to like plan on putting like 3 to 5 gallons of water down for every gallon of the container size. So if you're planting a gallon, 1 gallon, you're doing like 3 to 5 gallons that you're putting down. And then bigger they are, the more gallons of water you're putting down, right? So making sure to just keep that in mind with watering. And also with that, after that initial watering, so after initial watering, you're going to just need to run your irrigation for, it's going to be varying lengths, right? Because there's no kind of for tried and fast rule. And that's going to be dependent on stuff like the age of the plant, which the root systems of the plant, and like the type of irrigation system you have. So like Tim was saying, so again, older the plants are, they will, you'll water them less frequently than a younger plant. And then again, we're always kind of aiming for that 2 feet down of watering. And root systems, oak trees are totally different than a California poppy. You can think of your larger shrubs and trees as being more deeply rooted. So you'll be wanting to water more deeply with those guys, even like establishment. Once you're doing their kind of like your infrequent soak, you're going to want to water them more deeply down than our kind of smaller shrubs and perennials. Those are like a little bit more shallow over watering. But when I say shallow, I'm not talking the 6 inches. It's still the 2 feet. You know what I mean? You still want to get the full watering down. And then obviously the type of system you have. This is exactly what he's talking about with precipitation rates. Depending on how long you run the system is really going to be determinant on that. And we'll get there when we're talking about the delivery systems. And little tidbit, it's important not to rely too heavily on an automatic timer. especially in winter, because you just are kind of lending yourself to over irrigating. It's so easy to forget. And it's also so easy to, like a winter like this, where it's like, it's only started raining now, really. And, you could be like, oh, I'll turn off my automatic timer when the rain comes. And then you just forget. So it's don't rely on it too much. And also that's going back to this point of, we really want to emphasize checking the soil and monitoring it yourself so that you can start to like get the senses yourself for when something needs to be watered. Uh, yeah, so checking it, monitoring it, and watering early in the morning or late in the evening. That is important in terms of it's just a more efficient times to put down water, and that's to do with reducing evaporation and whatnot, right? And it's just better to water when the soil and the air temperature is cooler. I think actually, because I think I have this tidbit, yeah. Um, Yeah, so anyway, let me just finish my point and then we'll go into like kind of checking guidelines for watering times, which Tim mentioned. But just to this point too, watering in the morning or the late evening, it's just going to that point again, you want to be proactive as opposed to reactive. So if there is kind of some scheduled uh, like climatic event or something like a heat wave or anything like that, or Santa Ana winds, you want to start doing the watering several days beforehand so that they have access to that water. Here's the, you guys have this in your workbook too, but this is the City of Los Angeles's water conservation ordinance. This is it in written form, but you have it. And essentially, yeah, like Tim said, you can hand water as long as it's not from 9 to 4, as much as you want. But this is regarding sprinklers and also actually drip. So again, it kind of breaks it down into this, your odd or even addresses, and they give you a couple, 3 days a week. And actually they said you can water more than 3 days if with the drip system, if it's during establishment period. So that's something that just trying to manage that little like logic problem, but essentially you can during establishment period, and then you kind of have to modify or apply for like a variance or something like that.
I'll just, there's so many different documents out there. If you just go back to that last slide, and that was my fault for including this image, because I believe in your workbook it's accurate, and that is that you're actually allowed to have 2 15-minute run times per valve 3 times a week. So it's actually a cumulative total of 30 minutes 3 times a week for drip or water conserving nozzles. And I have to linger on this topic for just a second, because is LEDWP in the room? They will read this later, but they have the best intentions, right? We're trying to conserve water on a regional scale, and they got to just make some regulations that work for everyone. If you go into their list of water conserving nozzles, it's over like 30 different models. And as you guys will see in the in-person workshop, all of them have different precipitation rates. And that's again why a time-based model doesn't really necessarily indicate more or less water, because there are some extremely low precipitation rate water conserving nozzles, like the MP rotator has a precipitation rate of 0.44 inches per hour. But you also have the Rainbird H fan, which has a precipitation rate of like 2 inches an hour. So if you're just saying I have 30 minutes and you want to maximize your water budget, analyze that list of qualifying nozzles and choose the one that has the highest precipitation rate, because that's going to give you the largest amount of water to play with if you're doing your due diligence and following the LADWP guidelines. Because 30 minutes 3 times a week, so you have an hour and a half, and with an MP rotator, that's not even 1 inch of water. But with a Toro equivalent or the Rainbird equivalent, that is 2 inches a week. So again, it really depends on your delivery system, whether you're trying to maximize the amount of water you can put down. And with drip, you have a range, 0.6 gallons per hour per emitter is the equivalent of 1 inch per hour precipitation rate. A 1 gallon per hour per emitter is even more. That's 2 inches per hour precipitation rate. So again, it really depends on
Right.
how you're delivering that water and that impact that time restraint has on your system.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, you heard it here first. The hack for the the like the non-conserving nozzles is to get the one with the higher precipitation rate, because it is, I mean, this is the time they have the time restrictions, but they don't have the restriction. Well, they do have their options, but like Tim said, there are many. So yeah, definitely there are a lot of things about the ordinance that are difficult to coincide with some of the things we say today. But again, it's just about best practices and finding the hacks. And then on top of it, just trying to make the best fit for whatever your situation is. So yeah, here's their little thing. I guess we could do let's just do a 5-minute break. Let's see, what time is it? 6:04. Let's say 6:09. No, it's 6:10. 6:10. Let's come back and we'll talk about delivery systems. And if anyone has any questions, you could, I guess there might be in the chat. Tim, have you been answering this, I guess?
There haven't been too many. Everyone knows everything, so they don't have
Yes,
any
I love when
questions.
that
Perfect.
happens.
I love it. Yeah.
I love when I love the LEDWP hacks.
Yeah. I had that there was a lot of back and forth with me trying to understand what's going on. Because it's not simple. And people pointed out in the chat box, and we're gonna, we can't avoid some redundancies and topics of conversation in regards to irrigation. There's kind of some repeated themes, but like people were saying, if you're applying for a turf rebate, you can't use sprinklers.
Yeah.
You can apply for the sprinkler rebate, which you're just swapping
Right.
the high flow sprinklers with lower flow sprinklers. But like I said, if you guys go into your workbook, the list of nozzles is like, and many of them are the same model, but they include the quarter arc, they include the 180, the 360, and so there might be like 12 different individual sprinkle nozzles for the same model. But there are many different types. And someone just says the rebate does mention micro sprays, which are just the little sprays you hook to drip lines. Yeah, that's correct. You can hook a micro spray up to any manifold or any supply line. It could be a 1-inch rigid PVC with a adapter to 1/4-inch tubing. But yeah, micro sprays, and we'll talk about this, are smaller bubblers or sprays that have a limited throw, typically under 5 feet. And they're harder to regulate. However, they don't have a set precipitation rate. So it's something that you have to kind of monitor more on a case-by-case scenario, because typically the micro sprays are just regulated by a little screw on the top or a simple like rotating nozzle, and that'll just kind of decrease or increase the flow, but it's not as regulated as a spray nozzle in terms of its output. So you kind of have to finesse it a little bit. Bubblers they're nice for kind of small areas. So everyone should have their irrigation timers turned off now, hopefully.
That's true. Good point.
It's about to be a deluge.
Deluge.
A deluge.
Good.
I read
good use of that word.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I read some like in the Central Coast, they're gonna get like 7 inches.
Whoa.
Wednesday into Thursday.
Wow.
If you're in a burn zone, just get out of there. Just leave.
Yeah.
We all know what happens in a post burn with heavy rains. It's dangerous.
Wow, 7 inches.
That's we think of like high rain, like high precipitation rain events. It's surprising because they're usually much higher than our sprinkler nozzles, like 2 inches an hour of rain is a lot of rain. Like
Hmm.
that, it's scary rain. That's when like the streets are flooding and like
Right.
the soil can't absorb the water that fast, and it's just running off. So that's again why just like the slow precip ones are really nice, but aren't in line with the LADWP regulations, because if you want to put 2 inches down, you have to run an MP rotator for 4 hours, and it's against the rules.
Yep.
So, you know,
Uh,
but I was thinking too, like if you just maximized your precip time for all 3 days, you're not going to get a lot of, your ET in the winter is pretty low. So you're not going to lose a lot of that soil moisture in the days in between your your irrigation allotment days in the winter, at least, right?
right.
If you put 15 minutes down on an MP rotator, that water in the middle of the summer, that water is gone 2 days later. That's just, it's
Yeah.
evaporated and transpired before you can put the water down. But if you're doing it in the winter and just do Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you can feel pretty certain that that almost could be viewed as a single
One
rain.
watering event.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. In winter, yeah, it could work.
In winter, it kind of works. You just pretty much just max out,
Yeah.
1 week out of every month your irrigation allotment.
Oh,
You
wow.
guys, you realize we're only in phase. The phases get so much more extreme. We're only in phase 2 or 3. Phase 5 is just like watering. Nah, like you're not allowed. And
Right.
I predict that eventually in most municipalities in the West, you will not be allowed to use overhead irrigation at all.
Right. Yeah.
I
I think that
predict that in 15 years, it'll be only drip permitted, and you'll get fined if you are using sprinklers. I think, I don't know, maybe if you're rich enough, you're just like, you pay the fine. Like people who are
yeah.
like super wealthy, they just park in disabled spots. They're like, yeah, just pay the fine. I don't give a shit. Like, it's cool. I'll break the rules. I'm rich.
Right.
I
Yeah,
I
we'll
think
see. We'll
that's,
see. We'll hold you to that prediction. See if it
yeah, hold me to it.
set it here, January, whatever, 2021.
All 31 of you heard me say it.
We'll see.
We'll see.
Yeah, so let's see. We'll keep going. It's 6:10, right? Yes, 6:11.
Let's jam.
Okay, we're on it. So delivery systems. So this is getting more into what Tim was talking about, the specifics, essentially of your precipitation rates. But with any of the irrigation systems that we're talking about, you still want to kind of try to do it's a technique called cycle and soak, or a pulse irrigation style. And essentially you're trying to achieve one of these good watering events. So like a good rain event, essentially we're trying to achieve that. And the way it works is you kind of like water 3 days in a row. I know in a row might not work with the allotment, but essentially this is the idea, is you're watering 3 days in a row to achieve like a cumulative irrigation event that's totaled up to like 1 inch to 1.5 inches, up to 2. So like Tim said, 2 inches is kind of like the max you're ever going to really need to water, but that would be on a case-by-case scenario. So what you decide, but essentially you're trying to achieve about 1 inch to 1.5 inches of precipitation. And you can do that over the course of 3 days. And that would be all considered one irrigation event. And that's because, like we were just kind of discussing, but getting 2 inches of rain in one sitting is a lot of rain. And that's too much. That's literally like when, we start seeing flooding and stuff like that. So we want, the way we mimic our rains, our rainy 2 inches, is to kind of spread it out over a few days. And that is kind of the best raining events that we have, is these kind of light rains that cumulatively add up to, those higher numbers. So like 2 inches or something like that. But getting all 2 inches at once is, again, like we talked about with infiltration rates, it's not all soils can take that in that quickly. So this cycle soak or pulse irrigation method or technique is what you're aiming for with whatever irrigation system that you're working with. So sprinklers, which are like spray heads, there's the kind of traditional nozzles. These are higher flow rates, which means they're throwing out more water. at than like a drip or even the MP rotors, or the kind of, which are the like water conserving sprinklers. And again, uh, these ones, so these have higher flow rates, which also means they have kind of higher precipitation rates, which is they tend to put out about like at 1.5 inches to 2 inches per hour. And each one you can find the actual specs on these usually, with online or whatever. And these ones you want to be careful with runoff and stuff like that, because again, 2 inches is quite a bit in that time frame, and runoff can be an issue, or even just wind drift, because there's a lot of pressure, a lot of water going out, and a lot of, if you have wind, that's like it's just getting carried away and not necessarily percolating down into your soil. So I'm just gonna check my notes here. Oh yeah, LADWP is gonna LADWP doesn't want these sprinklers around, so that's where the rebates are for, is changing your sprinklers over. Because of exactly this reason. It's got high flow rates, so they're trying to decrease the flow rates out there in the community, because they want less water being spent on our landscapes, right? So there's going to be little points there for LADWP. Yeah, and again, this would be a situation if you're trying to do the pulse irrigation style here, you're trying to water 3 consecutive days, 20 to 30 minutes or something like that, if you have one of these precipitation rates, and doing that early in the morning. And that's what it would kind of look like with sprinklers, these kind of traditional spray heads. Again, or no, I think that's actually it. Yeah, that's so that's sprinklers. Again, kind of knowing this is just putting out more water at a certain amount of time, and then also it's like about 1.5 to 2 inches per hour is about the precipitation rates for these guys. Oh, the notes here. Oh, rotating nozzles. So yeah, not that we're promoting doing turfs, but LADWP wants everyone to know that the rotating nozzles are the preferred product for turf. So if you do have turf, you can change over to the rotating nozzles instead of these sprinkler spray heads. So just overall, they are trying to get rid of these. Sprinklers, the stream rotors, or the like MP rotors, these many of those old sprinkler spray heads have been already converted to this type, which is kind of the higher efficiency rotating nozzle. And these water more slowly, so they have a little bit lower precipitation rate, which is like something like 1/2 inch per hour. So again, the other ones, the traditional ones, are more like 1.5 to 2 inches. These are about 1/2 inch per hour. And that makes them more efficient with less runoff, because essentially if the water is going, if the water is being applied more slowly, the soil has more time to take it up, right? So that's why you have potentially less of an issue with runoff.
And a lot of that also has to do with droplet size. A lot of the newer technology, it's a bigger size water droplet, so it's just less prone to evaporation. And we might get into this, but some standard sprinkler nozzles, only 60% of the water output actually gets to the soil. Whereas some of the higher efficiency nozzles, which put out a larger water droplet, are more in the range of 75%. And then once you get to drip, it's like 99%, because you have zero loss through evaporation.
Right. Yeah. And so these sprinkler because of this droplet size and stuff, these they are almost mimicking the rain a little bit more, because it's a larger, and it's falling from above, and it's a larger droplet size. Did I already say this? Yeah, half inch per hour. With these MP rotators or whatever, or stream rotors, however you want to call them, the way it might look is running these sprinklers like once a month to achieve, again, that 1 to 1.5, maybe up to max up to 2 inches, but trying to achieve that. So you're doing this like potentially once a month between May and October, because that's like our summer months, right? So, but on new plantings, again, you might need to water a little bit, like some light watering in between these soaks. So you do always want to encourage these like deep, infrequent soaks. But on these younger plants, you might have to do like 5 minutes once or twice a week to actually in between those bigger, larger soaking events. so that so they're just not drying out. And then there's also kind of the concept of like more in like an established garden, but you can also do these like light refreshing sprinkles, which kind of will refresh the plant, but also like Tim said, in an urban setting, washing the leaves off, because dust and whatever else that gets on the leaves, that's helpful for keeping the leaves clean so that they can still photosynthesize, right? And also it kind of works to keep the soil surface cool and somewhat moist. And these sprinkles are more like, these are like 2 minutes at a time in terms of if you're using one of these rotators. So they're not deep waterings. That's not considered like a real watering event. That's just something that you're kind of sprinkling on top to, kind of just refresh the garden. So those wouldn't count towards like this deep soak water event that we're talking about, the 1 to 1.5 inches, right? Let's see, drip irrigation. So there's a lot to be said about drip. Let's see, you have your kind of point source drip or your inline drip. And I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with all the drip systems, but essentially point source drip refers to those kind of system with like small tubing, like some people call it spaghetti, and it's a small tube with an emitter on the end usually. And those are installed at the base, near the base of the plant. And then the inline drip is kind of a tubing that is manufactured with the holes or the emitters already inside the tube, placed along like regularly spaced intervals along the tube. And so that's just like a tube that has a hole in it with water coming out, as opposed to like a little spaghetti you can put where you want it to be. So anyway, just so you guys know the difference. But with drip irrigation, the method is it's different than sprinklers, because it's not like rain where the water is coming from above and going down and onto the ground, right? It's soaking, it's just soaking one spot, right, from where the emitter is. And the idea is you do want to have this distribution uniformity when you use drip, but knowing your precipitation rate, like Tim said, and knowing that, precipitation rate, and then also how long does it take for capillary action to work. And capillary action, I hope everybody knows, but essentially it's kind of like more the lateral movement of water as opposed to the gravitational movement of water. And I mean, if anyone doesn't know what it is, give me like a shout out. But essentially it's kind of like if you've ever like spilled a cup of water on your table, and then like the paper towel that's right at the edge might just touch the water, and then it slowly kind of all the water gets sucked up because it's laterally moving into this paper towel through the pore space. So anyway, that's really important with drip systems, because that's kind of how they work. They work by soaking the area and then the capillary action that moves it to the side and soaks the surrounding areas. With precipitation rates of drip irrigation, they don't come in inches. It doesn't come like the sprinklers, because of this kind of different way of watering. And they usually kind of range, actually they go lower than this and higher, but there's like 0.6 or 0.9 gallons per hour. And you would just calculate, we'll get into the calculations a little bit later, I think, yeah, in like a slide or two. But essentially you calculate how long it would take to achieve 1 inch of rain, and that's how you would manage your irrigation. So you would be trying to achieve still the same thing of this 1 inch to 1.5 inch of water per irrigation, but using your calculation or calculating correctly for gallons per hour, as opposed to the kind of easier sprinkler system. And we'll explain it, but essentially it's like you're just converting gallons to inches, because a gallon of water is equivalent to basically like 1.5 inches of rain is equivalent to like a gallon of water falling on 1 square foot of soil. And we'll do the math a little bit, but just kind of to finish up a little bit with the drip irrigation, is drip irrigation wasn't designed with native plants in mind. It was designed for agriculture. So that's a different system. And really it was designed to keep the root zone consistently wet with kind of frequent irrigations, and for actively growing kind of water loving crops, not even water loving, but things that need this kind of consistently moist thing, which tend to be our agricultural products. So it's not going to provide the kind of dry down that we want necessarily. So drip isn't necessarily like ideal for all situations with native plants, especially if you have this like diverse palette of plants. It might work better in like a small situation, or like a kind of like a parkway, or potentially like a bunch of water loving plants. You know, if you have a bunch of like rushes and blanking, but water loving plants, they potentially could do well in a drip irrigation system. So in anyway, kind of finishing this point, it's designed for agriculture, which is not the same situation as the native plants. Whereas with natives, we want these deep soaks, but infrequently. And drip irrigation is kind of set up and designed for consistent, frequent watering. So it's a different, you kind of have to hack it a little bit for it to work well with natives. So I think actually, let's just go to the next slide because it's still basically on drip, which is, you want to understand the difference of, like, you just want to make sure you understand the difference of drip from sprinklers. And also like this kind of the difference of the two. So point source drip irrigation is going to just do like a slow, steady flow of water at one spot and just kind of like soak that little spot and at the emitter. And then the inline drip is more like a soaker hose, and it's really going to be like soaking this whole region. So what was I going to say about that specifically? Oh, and drip irrigation is lower flow rates. So that's why lower flow rates and lower water pressure, hence why the LEDWP encourages drip. You know, they want less water going out, and they want this kind of conserving water situation, which drip can do. I think, yeah. So anyway, drip has its challenges because it requires quite a bit of planning and proper installation, and its maintenance and management. And like I said, all these kind of things about it where you really have to be thinking about the plants and their placement with the emitters. For example, we'll talk about this a bit, but like the emitters, to get that uniform distribution, you can't just put one emitter and like, you know, a salvia and be like, okay, I'm done, because the roots are just going to go to that one spot, and you're not doing the uniform distribution that we talked about, right? So you might have multiple emitters, and also this thing of putting the emitters kind of at the drip line of the plant. So doing the canopy and making sure that as the plant grows and its canopy gets larger, you're moving those drip emitters out, or the inline tubing. So there can be some issues that happen with drip, especially with planting it with the emitters being too closely to the crown of the plant, encouraging rotting, like we've talked about. And then also, if with an inline one, a lot of people just like plant the plant right next to the emitter. If you have the inline drip emitter tape, you're just planting the plant there, but as it grows, you're just essentially like creating a wet spot right at the stem. So again, this can be kind of an issue, but that all being said, though drip is difficult or challenging for native plants, it is the only option that LEDWP allows for with the turf replacement. So you can do hand watering, or capping your existing irrigation system, or converting it to drip. And those are really your only options with the LEDWP rebate for transforming your lawn. So that's just something, the reason we should go over it, so that you guys understand, like, it's not the best fit and it's a bit challenging, but it is doable. And it's just trying to keep all those things in mind that we talked about earlier. I think, yeah. Oh, and there's these little points here about, you know, having it underneath the mulch, and kind of maintains the soil moisture a little bit better. But I've seen it on top of the mulch too, but again, you have to add potentially more water so that it percolates through. I think, oh yeah, well, I'm trying to think if we should do the little poll right now. I have a poll. Let me see if this makes sense for what. I think at this point, yeah, let's do the poll. That seems fun to me. Fernanda, I don't know if you're still there. Do you want to put the poll up?
Yeah, I'm pulling up right now.
Okay. So this is like just making sure everybody's on the same page here. The thing about Zoom. it's hard on the teaching perspective. But let's say we have a south-facing slope with sandy soils, and it's planted with newly transplanted small shrubby perennial and small shrubs and perennials in September. Okay, and I've decided to water this 1.5 inches once a month. In terms of watering, does that seem like a good amount, too much, too little? And you guys answer, you can all click on your responses here. But the idea here is I just want to get an idea if you guys are kind of following along. I've never been on this side of it where I get to see all of them as they come in. This is cool. So again, there's not like a full right answer here, but just kind of gives me an idea of where you guys are at. Is everyone done voting? Looks like we have 85% in. 89%, anyone out there? Okay, I think that's good. So a lot of you guys put here, can everyone else see the results or just me? I don't know.
But I think just the two of us, Claire.
Yeah.
When I end the poll, everyone can see.
Okay, go for it then.
Okay.
Oh, this is an old poll. Either way, okay, so yeah, so it looks like 72% of you guys said too little. A couple of you guys said good amount, and one person said too much. So I'm not going to out anyone, but the idea here is, yeah, I kind of think it's too little. And one of the key factors would be that they're newly transplanted. There's not, if it's September, we're not likely getting rain until potentially December, right? So that's 2 months, September, October, November, if early, say it was planted in early September or something like that. We're not expecting rain. And also this sandy soils concept where we were talking about, this infiltration, they infiltrate, it doesn't hold on to water, and it's a south-facing slope. So it's getting blasted by sun in the summer. There's no respite from the sun. So that means that's a whole situation for water loss, right? And they're newly transplanted. So that means that they are not yet established. So they're not really ready to go these long stretches without water. So I would say it's too little.
And it also could just be part of it. It's like maybe not too much, but more than you need, not frequently enough.
Yes.
So like
exactly.
In my mind, you could do like 3/4 of an inch once a week.
Exactly.
And so you'll probably for the whole month, you're going to be using more water. But like you're saying, that's a really good point, because it's a little tricky. It's like, well, 1.5 sounds right, but once a month, September, oh my God, it's still 100 degrees. In September here. September was brutal.
Right.
So yeah, I think this is really helps illustrate kind of the various issues that we're dealing with.
Right. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of put something up there that kind of requires, like, there's not really a right answer, but there is kind of, and then also just thinking about the different elements, because this is really what you're thinking about when you do have a new planted garden or any kind of garden. So that's kind of how you'll be thinking about it. And that's how you get to the sweet spot, is like, you're like, oh, okay, I have newly planted, it's September, I'm in Pacoima, south facing, you're really thinking about all the things at once to create like the best watering situation. So yeah, anyway, just want to make sure we got that on, we're kind of on the same page there. 6:30. Okay. This little graphic, kind of depicts the average, it picks the average monthly rainfall for Los Angeles County. And as you can see, we get above 1 inch in the rainy season. So November to March is all above 1 inch of rain, which is good for our plants, right? But in the what's it called? In this like April to October section, it's all below 1 inch, if not 0, right? And so this is the area where we need to water. And we'll get into the specifics, because you could also supplement. This is a nice chart for thinking about how much precipitation you need to put down with your irrigation, right? So for your April, May, June, you have to add enough inches from irrigation, supplemental irrigation, to get up to that 1.5 inches of precipitation that you want to put down in summer, right? So just kind of using that. In fact, I think the, oh yeah, the like exercise really, oh, excuse me. Oh God, I'm going crazy with the PowerPoint. Is finding the rate of water, uh, the water application for different delivery systems. And this here says like, how long would you have to water for 1 inch of rain? And I wish I had made like a poll for this one, but I just didn't have time, guys. But essentially, when you want to think about it, the sprinkler head sprays, if any, well, like the sprinkler, you have, you know, it's 2 inches, it puts down water 2 inches per hour, right? So if you just want to put down an inch, what, I mean, that one's kind of an easy math one, which is like essentially you just have to put down a half an hour, right? Because it's 2 hours an inch. So if you want one, sorry, excuse me, it's 2 inches per hour. So if I just want 1 inch, then I just need to put down set my sprinkler system for a half hour. And then similarly with the MP rotators, they just have a lower precipitation rate. So they're doing like a half an inch per hour. So that means you, to get an inch, you might need 2 hours of irrigation. So that's just kind of the simple one. The drip one is where it's like a little bit more difficult. I'm just going to bring up this next slide because it's hard because I would love to like have a chalkboard right now. I guess I could have one, but essentially with drips, you're looking at the little emitters rate, and that's usually on the tape itself or on the emitter itself. Sometimes they're color coordinated to for different for their different gallons per hour, but drip is indicated by gallons per hour. And like I said earlier, this little factoid in blue is a gallon of water per square foot is approximately 1.5 inches of rain delivered to that square foot. So that's an important key that you will want to keep for your homework. But knowing that the gallon of water per square foot equals 1.5 inches of rain. And that's because with an emitter, say the emitter is a 0.9 gallons, it puts out 0.9 gallons per hour. That's, you're going to multiply, you basically multiply 0.9 by 1.5 inches, right? Because the gallon, it's 1.5 inches, sorry, it's 0.9 times 1.5 inches per hour, essentially, which comes out to 1.35 inches, which kind of makes sense. Like 1 gallon, 0.9 gallons per hour is not quite a gallon. So it's going to be a little bit less than 1.5 inches, which is 1.35 inches per hour. And so if you want to put down just an inch, you know it's not going to be a full hour if it's putting down 1.35 inches an hour. And you just would invert it, right? So it would be 1 hour divided by 1.35, and that's 0.75 hours that you would be putting down if you want to put down 1 inch of water with a 0.9 gallons per hour emitter. I'm sorry if like some people, I'm actually like this too, but like when people start doing math just verbally, I just like totally blank. So like I need these things to be written out, but we can go over it again at the end if we want. But that's kind of the idea, is you want to be able to calculate. So that's what this exercise was asking for here. You want to be able to calculate like how long do I have to run my irrigation system to reach 1 inch of this 1 inch of water? Because we were talking about ideally you want to be able to put down in one irrigation event 1 inches to 1.5 inches, potentially maximum 2 inches, right? So I just wanted to kind of go over that quickly. It will be in your homework. So if you have questions about it, we can talk about it at the end. But this kind of goes through it again. 1.5 inches per rain event. If that's every 21 days, say, again, this is dependent on your situation, but say you're doing that every 21 days from April until October, so that chunk of time we said on that graphic, then that's 10 separate irrigation events. And that equals 15 inches of applied irrigation that you're putting down. So that's kind of somehow a way to think of it, right? Is like you're putting down 15 inches of rain in that summer, sorry, putting down 15 inches of irrigation in that summer period. And then the winter months, hopefully, if it's a kind of good average rain year, would be bringing their own 15 inches between November and March. And that's kind of like the level of water we want, and that's pretty sustainable for a native garden. And so that's the thing, is we're watering in the summer for the attractiveness of the plants. And if you have a dry winter, say, you're going to add, so again, like we kind of talked about with this graph, if you don't have, if these bars on in the November, December, winter months aren't going up to 1 and whatever inches, you have to supplement that for your garden, especially if you want it to look nice, and especially if they're not established. So if you have a dry winter and you're not reaching those, you want to add more irrigation water to equal the average total for your area. So you want to make sure you're putting down irrigation like your 1 inch or potentially 2 inches or whatever per month, so that they are, again, getting those wet rainy season or mimicking that wet winter. And then during the first summer, during that establishment period, you can increase that 1.5 inches to 2 inches per rain event, just because it is their establishment period. So you really want to mimic like a wet winter. So in that first summer, you might have to water a little, like, you can bump up those irrigation events to 2 inches. Oh yeah, we've talked about this, but if you have a wet winter, keep the irrigation system turned off until about 2 to 4 weeks after the last big rainfall. And then you can turn your irrigation system back on, right? Because there's going to be residual water in the soil from the rain. And then we've definitely said this, but the heat wave, you could be adding 1 inch of irrigation water before the heat wave starts. So again, if you know there's a heat wave coming, you could do put 1 inch of water down with whatever irrigation system you have. Sandy soils, again, like we kind of talked about in the little poll, you can increase your irrigation potentially by 20%. So whatever your time calculation you get, just multiply it by 20% or add another 20%. And that could potentially help. But obviously checking for under watering systems. Don't just add 20% because you have sandy soils. This is just kind of like ideas for dealing with your irrigation system in relation to kind of like the tips we've gone over. So yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of obvious, but potentially you're putting, for the first year, potentially there's up to 30 inches of water being put down on your garden, either from natural rainfall or irrigation. And that kind of was like what I was saying, you're putting down potentially 15 inches yourself, and then ideally the rain is falling and you have 15. So there is quite a bit of water quite a bit of water you're putting down for your garden that first establishment year, or even the first 2, but again, this idea of transitioning out of as much water. Yeah, hand watering definitely could be necessary in the first several months, just because, again, if it's not obvious, sometimes it's hard to have a perfect irrigation, or it's difficult to have the perfect system, right? So with drip or whatever, they might not work perfectly. So having the hand water so that you can adapt and be flexible to whatever needs of your garden, sometimes it's just necessary in the first kind of couple months. Let's see. I guess I'm going to do 2 more slides and then we can do a Q&A part. Lastly, let's see, where to water. This is kind of self-explanatory, but you want to water where the roots are, or where you want them to be, or they should be, like as the plant matures. So again, going to this thing of the drip line of the plant, or to the root zone, you definitely don't want to, and when I say where you water, again, it's like if you're using your drip or your sprinklers or what are the other options? Hose, like a hand water. You want to be watering in that area where the roots are. So not just blasting it at the stem, though people love doing that. Yeah, so just as a general rule, again, I think actually maybe I already mentioned this, but the root zone is where the roots are most active. And so you want to be watering there. And yeah, I think that's and again, if it's not clear enough, don't water right at the crown. Slopes is just another little caveat, I guess, and definitely went over it with the poll, but they can be a challenge, and you want to just monitor and adapt to how water moves after you irrigate when you have a slope. So water, when you're irrigating your slope and you're just like everything's running off, then that's when you might switch to, okay, I'm going to do shorter watering sessions to let them percolate and then do the next one, So it's something that you want to monitor with slopes, because obviously you have this gravity situation that's going on. And hopefully the designer or installer for whichever garden you're dealing with has already addressed those slope issues. And that might be in the form of terraces or like the rain grading basins. And that's just something you want to be making sure continues to function throughout the irrigation and life of the garden. So making sure that water is still flowing through those spaces well. So for example, like with a rain graded garden, making sure that like no spillways are blocked, or the water can still pass through and you're not seeing overflow in areas you don't want it to be. And obviously like on a slope with terraces, like you don't want your terraces blowing out and things like that. So just monitoring your irrigation on slopes and getting kind of a gist for it. I believe, yeah, I have a couple, well, yeah, we have some more that I think we can try to do next week, which is kind of the irrigation, how you change the irrigation as the garden matures. What do you think? Tim, did you give me a yes or no on that? Or no? Yeah, so we'll do that one, I believe, next week, unless we want to kind of buzz through it real quick. But that's essentially kind of the changing the irrigation as the garden matures. Let's see. Let's see if we have. Do we have a lot of questions, or? I guess we could go over that. Yeah, I think I'm going to do the next one. So yeah, next week we'll do these last slides for changing the irrigation as the garden matures, like from an annual kind of year-to-year perspective. And we can just start with Q&A now. Let's do that. So
if people have questions, they can either enter them into the chat box, or you can just speak them out loud.
Oh, I'm sorry. Time out, guys. I forgot to tell you about homework.
Oh, homework.
And then you can ask me questions. So let's see. Homework, what is it? Oh yeah. So the homework will be, you want to evaluate like a client's what's it called? Like irrigation system. So you want to, and then so what I want you guys to do and email me is essentially, you want to calculate the time it would take to put down 1.5 inches with whatever current irrigation system you're working with. So it doesn't have to be currently planted with natives. We just want to know how long, like if you were to use this system as it is, how long would you need to irrigate it to reach that 1.5 inches? And you are going to check the precipitation rates of whatever the system is. And you can look those up online, or like I was saying, sometimes on the emitters themselves, it says, and then, or like get the make and model of your nozzle or whatnot, and you can figure that out. Get the precipitation rate, and then I want you to calculate how long you would need to water time-wise, like how many minutes or how many hours to get that 1.5 inches of rain in whatever garden. And so what I'm going to need you guys to do is send me a photo of the system. Like I want to see a picture of it, like it's a drip irrigation, or it's just a hose in my hand. And then hopefully like a photo of the system with like kind of the make and model of the thing. It doesn't have to, just if it's a drip irrigation, I get it. But and then like I want you to tell me the precipitation rates of the whatever it is, the system you're working with, and then calculate that and kind of show me your math. It doesn't have to be like, a ton of math here, but show me how you got to that answer. You know what I mean? I don't want just kind of like, hey, the precipitation's at this rate and at probably 2 hours. Tell me why it's 2 hours. So act like I'm a dummy and I don't get math, and like explain to me how you got that. And again, so definitely photo of the system, precipitation rate, and then the time that it would take to put down that 1.5 inches. And if you guys want like a challenge, just like think about it if you converted it. So say it's the system is a traditional sprinkler spray heads. What would it be if I converted it to a drip system, and like potentially calculate for that too, if you want to. But like Tim said, the precipitation rates are huge and really important with watering and knowing them when you're watering. So yeah, tell me that and how much time. If you guys, just as a reminder, that little note, 1.5 inches of rain is equivalent to 1 gallon. So that will be helpful if you're working with emitters or drip systems. So 1.5 inches equivalent to 1 gallon. And then again, we kind of mentioned this with precipitation rates, but those sprinkler spray heads will be higher precipitation rates than your water conserving nozzle ones. And if you're doing a hose hand watering, you can totally do too. That's a totally valid system of irrigating. And that's similar, like you can do that, which is calculate the time it would take to water that garden if you had to water it by hand. So think about it in terms of if you're putting 3 to 5 gallons on each plant, multiply it by how many plants and how long does it take for you to get 3 to 5 gallons. You can do that the old fashioned way by just filling up a 5-gallon bucket and timing it and being like, okay, that's my rate. And then my precipitation rate, and then be able to calculate, multiply it by how many plants you have to do and figure out how long would it actually take to water this garden by hand. So that's your homework. I think it's super fun. But questions, I'll look at the chat, and I guess I'll stop sharing, and then you guys shout out any questions. And yeah. Where is the chat? Oh, here it is.
Someone just has a 1.5 inches per month question mark. That's a good number, right? So, well, 1.5 times 12, that's going to be 18 inches for the whole year. And so that might not be quite enough for the first year of establishment. So it really just depends on the evapotranspiration rate of the season that you're applying, right? So 1.5 inches can last a long time if you apply it in December, but if you're getting your plants established and it's the first, warm month, you might have to apply a little bit more. So it kind of just depends on that interplay, and that's a very kind of like, again, it's just like a rough guide around what you want to apply. It depends on your soil, right? So at Theodore Payne, as you guys are going to learn, we have very coarse soil, which is very forgiving. Forgiving soil means you can mess up on overwatering and your garden isn't going to, it's not going to result in a lot of plant mortality due to overwatering because it's very fast draining. The water doesn't stay at the surface, at the crown of the plant very long. So, with clay soils, you have to really be more judicious with your application of summer water and do it in a way that's not gonna keep the soil wet for really long periods of time. So you kind of decrease the frequency of your irrigation. Again, what I said at the beginning of the class is that your minimum budget for an established garden is that 15 to 20 inches during the rainy season. The water that you apply in the summer is really dependent on the plant community and your aesthetic threshold for summer dormancy. A lot of native plants can tolerate a little bit of extra summer water, and that's like what we're saying, 1 to 2 inches a month applied in infrequent intervals to keep them looking a little bit greener. Now, a lot of plants, however, if you have heavy soils with manzanitas and ceanothus for montedendron, that's going to be detrimental. Some plants are going to respond phenomenally. A lot of desert plants, Sphaerosia, Abutilon, a lot of the less sensitive sages like Salvia clevelandii, Sphaerosia ambigua, Penstemon margarita bop, these can take a little bit more regular moisture in the summer. But again, the really chaparral dominant shrubs, they just don't need or don't want that type of water. If you put big berry manzanita in your clay soils and you're watering in year 2 on a regular basis in the summer, you're going to cause root rot in that species. Definitively, that's going to happen if you overwater that in the summer. So it's really, again, the bare minimum is that 15 to 20 inches in the wet season, reaching that total rainfall for that season. The watering in the summer, again, this is outside of establishment, right? Because that first summer we're applying moisture on a semi-regular basis to get your plants through that first really brutal summer and into the following fall where they can you can again resume that winter watering schedule. But it's the second summer and the subsequent summers where it's really dependent on your plants.
what type of plants you have and what type of soil you are working with. And our garden tour is a great example of the different types of watering regimes that you can use. Plenty of our gardens on the garden tour, 0 summer water. Many of them are on drip and still put water on once a week, even after establishment. And something like a ribes viburnifolium and some Pacific Coast iris in shady and sandy soil, that's totally fine. My folks' garden, which I installed 10 years ago, um, they have things on point source drip, and they have plants like Arctostaphylos emerald carpet. They have Frangula leatherleaf, which I believe is a more Northern California selection. They have strawberry, and they water once every 7 to 10 days. And that's really the only way you're going to keep a plant like Arctostaphylos uva ursi emerald carpet happy throughout the year, because that's really a more alpine / Northern California cooler, wetter climate species. So it's really, California is this huge place, right? We can't lump all of the watering needs together just like for all of the plants in California. We're talking about 7,000 species and another 10,000 cultivars or something like that. So it's you meant for the homework, sorry.
I was gonna jump in and just ask if it was for the homework, but Jade, it's 1.5. So what you're gonna tell me is how much time, like minutes or hours, would you have to turn this irrigation system on that you're reviewing to reach 1.5 inches of water? Does that make sense? I mean, you can put it in the chat.
Yeah, for that time, right? Per watering event.
Yes. So I just want, and essentially I just want to know, like, can you calculate how much time for a precipitation rate? Yeah, just for one event. Like, because essentially, I mean, each system, like Tim actually made this point, they could be so different. So instead of like kind of getting you guys to like explain to me your whole garden and why you chose that, maybe just starting with like calculations. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I think that my little like rant right there really is like the philosophy behind irrigation, is that you're trying to achieve that minimum winter rainfall event. And look at rainfall across the state. It's from 100 inches in the Pacific Northwest of the state to less than 5, or in sometimes 0 in Death Valley. Not that people are really selecting a lot of plants from Death Valley, but we definitely select a lot of plants from the Sonoran Desert, which is one of the hotter, drier deserts in the world. So, a lot of these plants can just take that no water, but it's, again, like the beginning point of this whole conversation is just really understanding where your plants come from, and their irrigation needs evolve from wherever they occur in the state, right? And so Ceanothus Yankee Point is one of my favorite plants to hate on because it's planted so widely. And has anyone been to Yankee Point? It's in Monterey County. So it's a cool, wet 365 days of the year. They rarely have days over 80. And people are planting. The other thing that I'll hate on Ceanothus Yankee Point is how it's used. People put it 2 feet apart, 3 feet apart on center, aiming for that full green look. And then all of a sudden, well, getting this into the pruning, they're cutting it all to try to keep it tight and in order. And, it doesn't work because you're taking a plant from far outside its natural range, typically underwatering it and planting it too tight. So again, those are kind of the factors that are really determining our irrigation choices when it comes to our regimes post-establishment. And I think, everyone comes from a different perspective too. I come at it as a grower and as someone who's like curating like almost a botanic garden where we're constantly planting new stuff in the garden. And Carol understands this really well. I don't have infinite labor to hand water all of these new plantings within a mature garden. And that's the other caveat, is that if you're like, and I know there's a difference between like the landscape when you're just like, okay, I'm going to plant the entire thing. I want solid bulletproof species so that I can just stick to a schedule that I change over time, but I'm not really looking to like
change things all the time. Whereas from my perspective, that's all I'm ever doing is just constantly tweaking and changing and like adding and trying new species. And so a lot of times I'm trying to just get that least common denominator of plant water needs to keep the old stuff happy and not overwatered, and the new stuff hydrated enough to make it through that first summer. And that's why one of the recommendations, if you are putting new plants into a mature garden, especially as it in regards to the watering needs, is you got to get those new plants in the fall, because planting the new plants in a mature garden in the spring or summer, it's just a lot more diligence, because if you're trying to keep those alive with your full zone system, which again, using the irrigation systems, watering an entire geographic area of the garden, you're likely going to be overwatering a lot of your plants just to meet the needs of those freshies. Um, freshies.
Yeah, yeah.
So
That's
again,
a great point.
there's different needs again based on, if your client's constantly like, all right, let's try this, I want to do this one this year, you got to put water down. And if it's a huge garden and you have 300 new plants, there's just no feasible way to hand water those on a weekly basis. You just, unless you just have unlimited hands and watering cans, and that's just kind of, you have to kind of try to meet the needs of all those different individuals in the garden.
Yeah, no, that was super informational. Thank you. But that kind of leads me to another question then, and this is more in related to design. So it's kind of a two-part question. The first part is I'm wondering if this course is going to go more in depth into the aspect of design, because I was looking at the course handouts, and it didn't seem to me like there would be more emphasis on design or any more discussion on design. Maybe I'm missing something, but I might have missed something.
You mean design of irrigation systems, or like
No, just design of like the plants, like native plant garden design, I guess. Any tips? Like if you were gonna go more into, I guess, design tips for designing, I guess. And then sort of the second part of my question was relating to what you were just saying about how you, as a grower, you are, you change, you're adding and adjusting your garden. So I was wondering if that's kind of a better way to design a native garden, is to like, you know plant some and then see how they grow and then add later, or is it better to just like do everything at once?
So yeah, I can answer your question. So this curriculum is really designed for people who already have a thorough understanding. Well, it's not necessarily a curriculum for designers. Really, this curriculum is designed for landscape maintenance professionals. So people who really aren't in the business of creating designs, but we know that a lot of people do everything. So this is not a design-based course, nor is it really intended to teach you how to install irrigation systems. There's a presumption that people understand a lot of how irrigation systems are designed, even some of these terms like distribution uniformity and like knowing what a pop-up is and knowing what 12-inch on center means. And there's like a lot of assumptions that we have to make, since it's really designed for people who are already garden professionals. So Theodore Payne does offer design classes, but this class more goes into analyzing why designs may have failed. So in our garden analysis, we kind of will look at gardens and evaluate flaws in designs and work to address those, but not necessarily like we're just, helping you figure out how to design gardens. That's just a whole another level of kind of information that we can't get into. And on the second part of your question, I think that mostly depends on your client.
I don't
Yep.
think most people who are spending $3,000 on a design and then $30,000 on the installation are really that interested in having you experiment. Um, versus if you're just someone's like garden consultant and they're like, hey, like it's the relationship you have with your client. You know, if I'm going into a garden and it's very clear that they expect a finished product that's gonna look good and not need a lot of tweaking in 3 years, I'm not going to be really experimenting. I'm going to be picking Salvia terraseca. I'm going to be picking Bouteloua, Rus, Toyon, Baccharis, Iva. I'm going to be picking bulletproof plants that I know are going to succeed. And many of our native plants are very bulletproof and can take a wide range of conditions. And another thing that I alluded to early on in our course is looking for those plants that have huge, broad distributions. Those are plants that, generally speaking, are more bulletproof. Again, my primary example being Toyon. It's extremely drought tolerant. It can take a little bit more water. It works in a number of garden conditions. Salvia apiana is actually one of those ones that can be a little finicky. And we have a lot of people saying my Salvia apiana died. And that's because if you look at Salvia apiana wild, it's up on a cliffside with excellent drainage in the chaparral with zero summer water. So if you put Salvia apiana in the valley silt and are watering it once a week, yeah, you're going to rot that plant out. So
I do
that,
think, just to add to it, I do think, I mean, it's not focused on design, but I think using a lot of the tips for maintenance to inform your design can be really helpful for it being a successful design in the future. So knowing that the maintenance can be maintained, or whatever maintenance crew comes through won't be dealing with kind of like issues that could have been solved with the design. So I think that's an important aspect too. It's just like a lot of these things are like, oh, like I just will make sure not to include that in my design so that there isn't the potential problem. Like making less work for whoever's maintaining it, I think, is an important aspect of design once you know what maintenance people are looking at, and a lot of this what's it called, material is talking about that, which is like, what is a maintenance person dealing with on a day-to-day basis? What are they thinking about?
No, that's really good. I think in terms of like covering all the potential problems and reasons for design failures is actually so in itself a very helpful design.
Right.
Um, to-
yeah, and that's, I believe, class 8 or 9 is garden assessment. And it's really going into like, it's like you're just walking into a garden. It could be 1 year old, it could be 20 years old. And it's really looking, okay, I'm evaluating all these different aspects. And obviously charging for that, because that's consulting. If someone says, hey, I want you to come my garden and give me, recommendations, well, that's going to cost you something. In terms of like, I'm going to spend the several hours it's going to take to analyze the irrigation, plant health, um, you know, soil structure, overall health of the plants, et cetera, et cetera. That's a several level process of kind of giving a client a really thorough evaluation of their garden and maybe where things went wrong. And, we'll get into it in class 8, but there's some very typical issues that you see typically cropping up in year 2, 3 of gardens. You can address them at that point. And if left unchecked, you're going to have really serious issues later on in the life of the garden. Typically overplanting and the irrigation scheduling is because a lot of times people just set that once a week, walk away. It hasn't been changed in 3 years. I'm like, why is this not doing well? And like,
Mm.
why did that just abruptly die in the middle of summer? It was so happy. Well, you have probably rhizoctonia or phytophthora that you're just, encouraging through watering once a week in the summer.
Thank you so much. That was awesome.
Yeah, those are great questions too. And yeah, maybe there's an opportunity to have a whole design for professionals curriculum. Like that could be
Right.
like totally whole nother.
Absolutely.
That would be fun.
Yeah, any other questions you guys have? I know it's 7:08, but yeah, any other questions? You guys should get Tim while you can because he's not here next week. So if you have questions for him, or sign up for the optional workshop, because then you can really pick his brain because he'll be there for that class.
And so people know, a representative from LADWP will be on hand next week. So I encourage people to review the curriculum as it pertains to the rebates. I think that's one of the biggest business opportunities for landscape professionals. No one's even going for these right now. They have so much money, LADWP and the rebates. And while it goes through the customer, that just comes directly back to you in terms of offsetting the total cost of a re-landscaping project for your clients. You know, it's up to like $15,000 for turf removal. So that greatly incentivizes doing re-landscaping projects for customers. And now is the time. There's so much construction happening because people are just at home looking at their gardens and bathrooms and being like, now I see everything that's wrong, so I want to fix it.
Right.
So Martha Rodriguez will be on hand to answer the rebate related questions next week, because it is a little convoluted.
Right.
It can be a little confusing in terms of what's available and all the caveats and all that stuff. So
Yeah, I would even recommend, not sorry to just jump onto your point, like checking out the rebate program. And like you said, like come with your questions ready, because I find, because I've done quite a few transformation kind of projects like this, and like homeowners, they don't want to have to know that they have all the regulations right. So if you come knowing that you can install the design with accordance to the lawn transformation thing, and knowing that like, okay, I just have to cap the things and you're doing all the things that are required by the rebate program, then you're ensuring your client that they'll get the rebate. You know what I mean? And they don't have to worry so much about like, okay, did you do this? Or even if they are worrying about it, you did do all the things. So making sure that you understand how, like what's needed to like achieve like, or actually get the rebate, I think it's super important, because it is, like Tim said, it is kind of convoluted and there's like little details. So I would say come prepared to ask Martha lots of questions or clarify anything you have doubts on, because it's so much harder to get a hold of LADWP after this, you know? So yeah, that's a great point. Thanks, Tim. Let's see. Oh, there's one last question. If plant is showing signs of rot, is it already too late to save by turning off the irrigation? I mean,
not really.
yeah. I
No.
mean, yeah, it's like,
I don't think so.
yeah, I've seen, I mean, I haven't really seen, I think I've seen like sometimes a really young plant, but if it's showing signs of like rot, yeah, that's hard. But you definitely do want to turn off the irrigation though, because it could just be an indicator that other plants that maybe aren't rotting yet are, you know, on their way. So it could just be like your canary in the coal mine. So definitely I would consider still turning off the irrigation.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Claire. If you have like a whole bed of the same species and like some at the bottom end of a slope are rotting, that's a sign that there's water accumulation at the base, and that could lead to other issues. So that's, yeah, a good diagnostic point. Guys, what is this optional workshop you just mentioned? So you should have already, if not, you will get an email from Brenda Kyle. There are 2 optional workshops associated with our curriculum, and they follow the relevant class. So there's an irrigation workshop and a pruning workshop. Those seem to be those were listed as the reasons why people are most interested in taking this. And they're honestly, most of the questions we get related to native plant horticulture have to do with irrigation and pruning. So February 6th,
6th, yeah.
the
February
irrigation.
6th and February 20th.
Yeah, so Brenda will be emailing you guys, and there's 3 or 4 time slots per day, so that there'll only be a maximum of 10 people at any one time with me to kind of reduce, you know, COVID safe, and also just for more kind of one-on-one time. So yeah, you guys should be getting an email with opportunity to sign up for that workshop through Eventbrite. And it's optional. You don't need to take it to pass the course. There are no tests.
Except for my cool poll questions. Those are
except for
tests,
the poll.
guys.
Yeah.
Cool. So next week will be part 2 of irrigation, like Tim said, mostly based on the rebate. We're going to finish up what I didn't get to do today, which was the kind of annual perspective of changing your irrigation. And then, yeah, Martha Rodriguez will be mostly there at the end for talking more specifics with the rebate. And yeah, sign up for the Eventbrite with the workshop with Tim. Okay, I guess we can stop recording and see you guys next week. Thank you.
See ya.
Guys, see you next week.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Email me your homework.
No.